Let's talk about Stonehell Dungeon Volume 2 Into the Heart of Hell by Michael Curtis, a classic Megadungeon setting for use with the Labyrinth Lord and early versions of the original fantasy role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons. I've reviewed the first volume of this, Down Night Haunted Halls. You can find that elsewhere on the channel. Um, this is long, it's 170 pages in PDF. Labyrinth Lord, by the way, is originally compatible for, well, it's a version of Basic Expert. So not of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but of the simplified set from the 80s. This is levels 6 to 10 of the dungeon, and it's the kind of lower half. And the first half, when I talked about, I liked it. I thought it was good. There's some endemic issues in it, which are basically the same here, which is Curtis's writing is very efficient and relatively precise, but it's not invigorating. And you could say, well, I don't need my technical manuals to be invigorating, but I think it can help to spark, if the DM's imagination is sparked, they're going to be better at the table at creating a compelling situation. Uh, it's yeah, that it has sometimes a repetitive format. That's less true here. Some people would really say that about some of the levels in Volume One, and it has issues with the amounts of treasure because it's a version of the game based on gold for XP. You know, you get gold from the dungeon. That is a measure of your accomplishment, which measures your XP as well. So yeah, I'll say those up front, so I don't need to dwell on them too much. But yes, this is good. It is. It is also very good. It's better, I think, than the first volume, and I think it pushes the limits of what BX Basic can do in terms of high level play. You know, high mid level or whatever you want to call it. By the time you're getting to level 10 and 11 characters, maybe. Beyond which I think really, I mean, beyond maybe level 7, 8, really, but certainly beyond level 10 or so, um, the companion master immortal levels of the old rules cyclopedia Beck me, that kind of very high level stuff, I think becomes increasingly hard for the system to cope with, and you need to be playing AD&D really. But this does as well as it can do. It's at points marvelously creative, and it's a very impressive piece of work. It's also interesting in terms of what Curtis does as someone who does layout tricks, who is big into layout as a tool of communication. He's originally inspired by the one-page dungeon, and each section is not actually a one-page dungeon, but he ends up doing the basic key as a two-page dungeon, and then other stuff is in supplementary material, like other pages. And this is about as far as that format can go as well, but it doesn't fall into many of the traps that modern heavy layout books fall into. Small amounts of text, low amounts of text that aren't always informative, often confusingly laid out, ironically, with too much interest in the art design and graphic design. So yeah, this is this is good. The top half of this dungeon is fairly generic. It's there's some kobolds, there's some orcs, there's some trolls or whatever, and this begins to push that over, because at the bottom of Stonehill there is something called a Nyxthesis. That was mentioned in the first book, who has been corrupting over the last couple of hundred years this ancient place with much history, with all kinds of civilizations that have lived here or do live here. The Nyxthesis has begun to suck out the bad emotions, the negative emotions of people, to make them unhappier, has begun to manipulate events and cause more chaos, as part of a virtuous cycle for the Nyxthesis. And this is we get closer to the Nyxthesis, and eventually that's the boss of the dungeon. You can see the table of contents there, and you have 3 pages of general history. This is giving more detail than in the first book about the various races who've settled here, the various most of whom you don't meet or find out much about, and that's okay. But it's something where Curtis would occasionally say, look, here's a section in this area, and it's the biggest area is actually in the intro. Otherwise, it'll often be a paragraph or 2 paragraphs just to explain. Look, this is particularly relevant because there is actually an intelligent pool, basically on level 5, is it? It can even be transported around by the PCs, and who can answer questions about the past. So it might be relevant, especially because there are puzzle solutions therefore that way. So giving the DM just enough info to say, oh well, the Kion were these people, that's useful, and he doesn't belabor it too much. There's then just the general stuff about what's going on, the description of the big chasm that crosses 3 levels, stuff about how chaos events work, factions and reactions, every action done to win the favour of a certain group has costs and benefits. Every action done against a certain group just has a cost. So yes, he does say, I think he says, and this includes in terms of rival casts of the Dark Elves who live here, for instance. I think he does give a bit of recommendation. I feel like he says somewhere, just write these out in this way or something. But yeah, it's good to it's if a Megadungeon, this kind of thing where the whole campaign is in this location, or basically in this location, you need to have social dynamics in that. And it's something which, in a pretty simple way, it's just about reaction, penalties, and bonuses, and maybe extreme things like being banned from a place. It's quite easy for an overzealous party to find themselves banned from kobold corners, for example, should they anger trusty Sniv. It happened in the author's home campaign. One thing, by the way, you do generally pick up that this has been played through. This isn't sort of just been knocked out. This is a fun idea, I'll publish it. This has been played through, in some areas, I think, as I answered it multiple times. And yeah, so well worth any product that is play tested properly. I think there is something to say for that. You have adventure seeds to draw the party in. You have a rumour table, true, false, 20 rumours. Anyway, this is the basic model of the book. Level 6 master map, which set these are 6 areas. Most levels are 4, but 6, 7, and 8 are 6 areas. And you can see you have the slimy sewers of Mukaloth, Dwarven Hermitage, the Magisek Sulcus, the Lost Rooms, the Sepulchre of the Kion, and the Trade Corridor. These are all separate maps, and they come with their own keys and special features. And these are obviously each a dungeon. And I think in the first book, I think he does mention something similar here, but in the first book, Curtis explicitly says, feel free to just replace one of these with something you want. And that's truer higher up in terms of how easy it is. Further down, 2 things apply. One is the interactivity increases. Generally, there's always interactivity between sections, but it increases in this volume compared to the first. And also, there just tend to be they tend to be more interesting. But so that's point 2. Point 3 is, in terms of that interactivity, a specific thing is how many interlocking features there are and factional features, and so it becomes less appealing to just get rid of something and add in something. Now, I think there are plenty of sections it is still possible. I think it might be this level, or it might be the one below. I think it's the one below. There's like a layer of some Minotaur mercenaries. There's nothing much going on there. You could replace the Minotaurs entirely. You could keep the map even. I think that is actually one thing I realise. I think it's in the afterword, but that is an interesting thing. Curtis says that he basically ended up with final maps that he could draw and make clear and make sense, whereas his home maps were more complex, which does remind me of the bizarre story of the first Undermountain box set for Forgotten Realms. Has some really interesting stuff in it, but the maps aren't actually of Undermountain. They're from the artist, the cartographer's home campaign, because they basically told Ed Greenwood, no, your maps are too complicated. Yes, back when Greenwood designed dungeons. Anyway, these 3 levels, 6, 7, and 8, are heavily influenced by having a chasm in them, and you basically meet a lot of mid-tier, mid-level, inverted commas, factions. This is a highly factional area in a way that you get, particularly the kobolds, but a lot of the upper level factions it's very hard to interact with. They are largely aggressive. Now, that's not wholly true, and there are meeting places, there are some neutral areas, but here there is just slightly more, if you want to do in that area. Not always, but sometimes. So here Yeah, us have a quick look. Format-wise, typically has a monster list at the start with the short version of the monster. These are four types of Virulia, who are dark elves in a kind of D3 slash Elric kind of way. They're very much into the dark elf side of things, and with a kind of sword and sorcery feel. Menzo Baranzan, I would say, for all that, you can compare, and I love D3, and I think it's the best presentation of Drow in D&D. But there are sometimes times that Menzo Baranzan and the Drow in the Forgotten Realms are presented similarly, but overall it becomes it picks up a different feel to sword and sorcery fairly quickly, I think. You have a slime quarter. This is so there's a couple of pages of special features here. You can see you get the map. This is the two-page dungeon map, wandering monsters, legend features, which will point back to anything else you need to know, and special rule, and then a key of the 24 locations, and then another couple of notes, including who Amukaloth is, well, what she's goddess of, or whoever she is. Yep, this is fine. Dwarven Hermitage, this is a bit more interesting. It highlights a problem I still have with the kind of interactivity of Stonehell. The positive interactivity, the things where I'm actually like, oh wow, there's multiple things you can do in an area rather than just fight, even though fighting can be fun. In BX, that is one thing, is that in AD&D, it's a funny thing that, yeah, in BX, fighting is so swingy and dangerous. Just on an average sample, if you've played enough of each, I think you could say there's a bit of swinginess in both, more than in some editions. But AD&D, your characters tend to be more competent and have more options. BX explicitly and intentionally trims away some of that stuff, which leads to, I think, one reason why it's an OSR favourite for those OSR kind of types who are into, well, actually the idea of a sort of creative, imaginative exercise in the fantasy milieu using simple rules is attractive. And so combat is actively very undesirable. Whereas in AD&D, if you think you've got a decent punt, especially if you've got a few magic items and a few options, you go for it. In BX, that is a lot swingier, and I think so. Yeah, when you have more options, that's good. And this is one where there are kind of options, but basically these are corrupted shadow dwarves. They are not good dwarves or neutral dwarves. They're not. They're called here the what are they called? The Draugr shadow dwarves. So kind of they're not undead, I don't think, but they've been corrupted by something called the Gloom Crown atop the head of Olin Deep Eyes when they were searching for wealth down here. They got permission from the Virulia, and they were from the prison population mentioned in the previous book. So they're not kind of cheerful dwarves from far away. They are somewhat hardened criminal dwarves, but they've been mostly corrupted and turned into these shadow dwarves. And there is Stonehill has a strong tendency towards and this is no bad thing necessarily, but towards everything that's a bit grim and nasty side of fantasy and sword and sorcery fantasy particularly. And this is a good example where you're like, oh, there are dwarves, they have an area, you can maybe kind of talk to them sometimes, but it's kind of hard, and they're just crazy and evil. Yeah, they are decent. I'd say here's a monster block. It's yeah. His monster design is I think pretty good. They're very stealthy. They drain, and they drain like a shadow, and they can put their drain on their weapons. There's also Arcanatech constructions which have been traded to the dwarves by the Plated Mage. You've been to the old layer of the Plated Mage if you've been through the first set of levels, and he is further down. He does important NPCs and he does new magic items. The Gloom Crown, which basically allows you to drain life, but it is evil. So yeah, the maps, you can see there is, and you've seen from the overmap, there is they consistently are quite highly looped. They tend to, within an area, have a few different things going on. You can just tell, okay, these have a few traps or interesting things, or there's a rock garden, which is obviously more sinister than it sounds in the context. So there's a few different things going on, secret doors, as here, um, and so on and so forth. There's always a few different things going on, and I think again, if you're going to make the dungeon the not just the centerpiece of the campaign, which is very natural for D&D, but the whole campaign, then there has to be a pretty consistently high level of maps being, you know, functional and interesting. I mean, think your Melan diagrams for that, like how many options are there, and it's partly because that also gives the DM options. The more options there are on the map for the players, or which way do I go, the more options there are for the DM as they try to make things react in a living, interesting way. So yeah, this is a decent area, and it's a good set of largely antagonists. Obviously, one thing that is often not mentioned, and I think veterans reading these supplements won't pick this up, is you're told about reaction rolls. Obviously, it's mentioned in the faction discussion, but what you'll often pick up, I think, is that there's this kind of slightly weird thing where it's not wholly clear when you should be rolling or not. And that might make you think I should always roll, but then sometimes you're told, oh, here's the combat tactics of a monster, so you think, oh, is it that they will attack? And I think Curtis doesn't escape that, and I think that is something which I'm happy to make the judgment, but I think again, if you're the one designing the book to sell to me, then probably good if you do. Let's skip on a little bit. So, yeah, the trade corridor. So there's a few other areas anyway, obviously. There. The Virulia are, as I say, these sword and sorcery dark elves. And they get on with lots of people. They get on with the... they let the dwarves... or they've traded with the dwarves, and they've let the dwarves live here. They are quite high-tech. There's a bit of... they have basically magic CCTV. They will monitor areas, and they are quite active in defence. They have got all these casts and stuff, which there is no single list of, which is annoying. He should have done that somewhere, unless I've missed it, I guess. But yeah, there's a few areas the Fire Beetle Bar and the casino. There is another meeting place there. But you can see here, you've got the dwarves who maybe you can talk to. They are not automatically antagonistic. They've worked with the Plated Mage and the Virulia. They're just not very nice. You've got the Fire Beetle Bar on this level, and you've got the Trade Corridor. You've got the Virulia. The fact you can talk to them, and you may even be able to get permission eventually to go down to their city of Tanataliv. Nyx drones, that's relevant. In terms of those, the people the Nyx thesis is basically taken over eventually. Each of the Virulia casts has a different gimmick. I forget what the upper level ones were, but the Daizon Kilril are the traders, and the Obuld It Daizon are now vassals to the Daizon Kilzil, who are sort of flagellant fighters with some cleric spells. Yeah, so you've got the cartographic stuff here. This is the areas that they are monitoring. So if you're just up here, which is not in the main corridor itself, it's just a separate section of dungeon, then yeah, the Virulia won't attack you. There's other stuff you can do there, but once you get down into this area, that's their territory here. Let's look at it as an example at just some of these entries. The Sallow King, throned-up dais, ancient skeleton dressed in rotted yellow robes, bearing a rusted crown and broadsword, tracks and dusty floor give the dais a wide berth. See dungeon notes. We then flick back, because that's where it is, and we've already read this, I suppose, if we've read it in order. And yeah, it's basically a trap. It turns out it is either you can... It becomes basically a maze spell, or the entire the entire party can go into it as well if you touch it. So it's just a trap. It's just a trap room, and that's it. Yeah, there is. I'll see if I can find any other examples as we go along without trying to scan the text line by line. Um, but yeah, there's a few in mind. I'll see if I can catch as we go. Where Curtis is big into that tradition of OSR BX design, which is high risk, high reward. Certainly, that's true. This is sort of separate from the fact that sometimes there are issues with the amount of treasure. The idea. Okay, this could be really good. This could be really bad. A lot of your B1 coloured water pools. Different things you could do, and this could be good. This could be bad. There are many of these. Basically, every level has a couple of these. Press a button, see what happens. Might be good, might be bad. And um, I vacillate on how much I approve of it as design. Obviously, many people really love it, so feel free to ignore my doubts. But that I think it's quite fun sometimes. But I think it's fun in small doses, and I think basically because it cuts the connection between good play and reward. Because essentially, you just press buttons, and sometimes, of course, and the screwier it is, and certainly Curtis can screw you a lot. The screwier stuff is, the less likely you are to press buttons, which cuts the content out of the game. But if it's completely 50-50, great, but it means you're not making decisions anymore because either you're the kind of person who likes to press buttons or you're the kind of player who doesn't, in which case you either do or you don't, and then it's a 50%. There's no real decisions involved. It's just a basic what you enjoy or don't. A few treasure allotments here, which are this is pretty small. I think is meant to be, albeit 5-6 HD hellhounds against 6th or 5th to 7th level characters is pretty brutal. There's a trap at the dinner bell at number 6. So you see there here, the trap is here. If you destroy the hellhounds, you can get some pretty small amount of treasure, 60 gold off that, 1800 there. But there is a secret door, albeit with yellow mold. We'll touch on that again in a second, but with more stuff. Not amazing, I'd say. 1900 in gold from the gems, 1310, and so yeah, that's just over 3000. Plus, albeit, and this is better, 2 scrolls. It is covered in yellow mold though on the floor in front of the secret, which is hidden by dust. So you're thinking to get this much treasure, which is in the end, 5,000 gold or something. Not a tiny amount, but at 6th level, you've got 5 characters, 6 characters. Maybe you've got some henchmen who are taking XP shares as well from gold. You could end up being like, well, we've each got 700 gold, or 700 XP, sorry, 600 XP for fighting hellhounds, and also like 2 guys died from the yellow mold, because how often are we sweeping dust away very gently to see if there's yellow mold there? It's a really quite brutal trap monster in that sense, because once you're activated and once it's in the air, people are rolling their saves, and so statistically some of them are going to die if it's enough people on the curve. Customs post. Yeah, you have a Virulia shrine. You've got, and there is stuff here. There's plenty of treasure around, but it's not very much for the risks involved, and 2, Curtis is incredibly disciplined about making sure everything is dangerous to get everything that's good. And I think there's a debate there to have about. I know I will sometimes have some relatively easily accessible treasure, not just here's 5,000 gold sitting on the floor of the first room you go in and there's nothing to hurt you, but rather that, though, I mean, that freak players out, so maybe you should do that. But I think you've got to have some things which the players feel like, okay, this moderate amount of treasure was easier to get to, even if the hard stuff is gated, because it's part of what pushes them on to get places. It's why you could criticise something like the moat house for having so much treasure right near the end, with only a couple of bits of decent treasure on the entire top level. For the amount of danger you go into. Yeah, you have. There's plenty of practical thought going on about what happens when players mess around with stuff. Morlock Pen. This is a good example. They're so crushed in morale. There's only a 1 in 12 chance, um, modified by charisma, so modified by your charisma reaction bonus, that you can stir them up to rebel against their masters. Curtis knows that players might be messing around with the Virulia, and that's why they're in those rooms. They're not just trading. They're not become friends. If they're there in a more antagonistic context, then they might want to stir up the slaves, but the slaves are hard to stir up. And this is something he does in lots of areas. He'll say how easy it is to turn X against Y. There is, I think, on the next level, maybe level 7, yeah, there is an Etin where one head has been turned good by a Helm of Alignment change. Um, and that is an interesting thing there about, like, you could probably convince them to come with you, but you've got to deal with the evil head, etc. Here's the level 7 master map. What you can see again, you've got the Magitek Sulcus, you've got the various areas, the casino, big important neutral ground, Welch's Hall, dungeon, western and eastern undermines with the decayed mine track. These are basically dungeon areas, and then Tana Tyleave or Tleave, which is a I feel like it must at some level be a tribute, amongst other things, to D3's Drow City. Though certainly in terms of the rival house thing, I was thinking as I read it, of course that is in D3, but it's also Menzo Branson and the Realms is big on the idea of the rival houses and so on. There is a shared aesthetic though and you see this actually with Morrowind was another thing I was thinking about as a in the mix of dark elves living around mushrooms with rival houses is outside of Warhammer where it's not so big. It's basically the default presentation of dark elves, and the Virulia are underground elves. So, and they live with. I know Morrowind is not underground, but they're the same thing. But yeah, the idea that you've got lots of fungus, you've got lots of slave races, you've got a highly ordered society, but with lots of rivalries between, in this case, castes rather than houses. So let's skip on a bit. Krug. Krug is a cave boar who's been corrupted by chaos. Uh, Mummy Tor. Here, cold ghosts, frozen ghosts, clockwork crabs, cave. Yeah, there's increasingly kind of intentionally fun, weird things in the in the dungeon. Actually, there is actually one thing in the level above, in level 6, I liked. Here is a really good group of locals you can befriend, gargoyles of all people. I just think that's great. There's an ancient gargoyle who may have been there when gargoyles were first made by magic users. They're basically they're neutral. He's neutral, particularly. So there is actually a potential reason, like alliance to make with them against some of the other flying creatures on the Magitek Sulcus, which is where there aren't always very many strong direct links between floors above. You're told, oh yeah, this is down below, or they sometimes talk to these people. Here you have a geographic link where you can just access, and I think there's one stairwell that does something similar, and that kind of skipping levels or giving different space and context to levels is a good Megadungeon thing. I think I like it in a normal subsurface environment, and I've seen my own players kind of flirt with it, even if they are very, really bold enough to, want to do that. Uh, his setting, this idea of the kind of palimpsest of civilizations, gives him a good excuse for lots of different things in there. Maybe the one thing I'd say, and there are a few exemptions to this exceptions, and certainly as you get further down and the setting gets weirder, uh, but it is rarely the case that, and this is partly because of in terms of just how I work as a reader, perhaps, but because the art budget is low, understandably, and because the writing style is very precise and narrow, there's a bit to me of a lot of these kind of ancient civilizations ruins feel like the same thing. It's a bit like to use the Elder Scrolls example. It's a bit like all these ruins in Oblivion, where you're like, oh, these are just all the same, basically. And there's a bit of that here, that there is a difference between these places and the maps and the monsters. He's good at creating weird new monsters, mummy tours, clockwork crabs. Uh, so he's good at that, but there is a limitation in how the environment is presented. Some people just won't care. They'll see it so much as like a, either I'm happy to make it all up myself, amazing, or yeah, it doesn't matter to me as long as it's functional for the game. But for me, I like something in between. The hinterlands, the lair of Tritonibris the Chimera, and lords over the northern edge of the Magisec Sulcus. You get the slums of Tanatailev as well in this section. Angle Thurges, normal humans and elves. Basically, they are humans and elves, I think, as far as I can tell. But they are just obsessed with weird magic. They have some spec because of their uh, because of their delving into the angles between space. They take no damage from weapons possessing straight edges. Statues of animate glass, another Virulia cast, the Kani Harasi. Spies and assassins are in this area. The Virulia, they're, yeah, I mean, you can see here, by the way, hit dice wise, Angle Thurges are HD 6 to 9 and have spells, including some pretty violent ones for 7th level characters, say. A polymorph other and a lightning bolt coming out of them first round is going to be enough to knock about many a party. Something I was definitely reflecting on as I looked at some monster blocks is because Curtis likes challenging monsters. He is not, I think, actually from what I can tell, a BXDM who thinks that players should simply not engage in combat or take risks. He assumes they can and will if it's intelligent, and in that case, it's gonna, you need to have good, interesting stats so that you can really challenge them, and it's going to be important by this point for players to have, for characters to have protective rings, rings of protection. Is there a ring of spell turning in Labyrinth Lord? Things that actually really can keep them going. A rod of resurrection. You might not have raised edge yet, but something that, we've got 3 charges on the rod of resurrection. Something that gives them an option. And because of the weird treasure allotments and the, like, Curtis doesn't. The magic items tend to be quite fun. There are some very fun ones, and if you totted them all up, you'd be like, "Oh, there's loads of interesting stuff." But there is perhaps just a slight under allotment that when you think they're going to get here, it's a Megadungeon, right? So you can abstract a dungeon from this and use on its own, of course. But it's a Megadungeon, so if you're playing it as prepared, they're going to get down there and be facing this stuff. Where, in a mutual surprise situation, on, let's see, in the Angle Thurge layer, the Wandering Monsters are Angle Thurges and animate glass statues. And yeah, so if you bump into them, their number appearing as 1d10 in their layer. So presumably in the Angle Thurge layer, they count in their layer. So it's 1d10 of them. Mutual surprise. Yes, maybe you've been stupid as characters to get there, but it's something where you're going to have to play so well to avoid these guys killing multiple members of your party most times, and that's okay. But it's something to bear in mind in terms of your making it clear to players the kinds of liminal zones they're in, the transition between zones, because yes, I think if it's that. There, those the Angle Thurges are conjuring elementals, lightning bolting, and what was the other one? Polymorphing other on the first round. There's going to be some pain, and you may feel even like a bit of bad luck could get you into that situation. And I'm thinking, let's say you rely on Elven Surprise to sneak through an area. Some elves and halflings sneak off to go somewhere, or some elves do, and just the odds are against them. Um, it is frustrating for players to feel like they've done a decent amount of things right and everything's gone wrong. So yeah, the magic items to help them deal with this kind of stuff, and at least for them to be able to make the decision. And if they get it wrong, they get it wrong. Might be important. Yeah, you can see here this is the top of Tanna Leave and the slums that were being mentioned. The Rod of Angles, which can create mirror images and geodimension. There are fun magic items. That's a simple one, but it's actually a very creative one. Troglodyte Butchers, Guardhouse of Virulia, and so on and so forth. The casino, I like the casino. This is maybe the first sort of. It's not just a funny level, and none of the levels are just funny, but I think it's the first level that really presses the mood. Like there's a bunch of games with rules for playing, random gamblers. Basically, the games are dumb, by the way, but that is a good thing, not a bad thing. You've got a you've got a cleric who's the cleric of the goddess of chance, and yeah, it's just yeah, you can see like gaming areas, agents of fortune knocking around, watching you to see if you're cheating, kobold servants, um, lots of treasure in there. Yagric's quarters, the casino's resident wizard, has several offensive magics, known as wand magic missiles and a ring of Ginny calling. Again, though this is a shared ground and it's good for the players if they can go here, there's also enough there to tempt the players into thinking, could we rob Yagric? Or could we negotiate? We need a Ginny. We need a Ginny to help us. And putting the information in there, again, maybe there's a barrier, there's kind of line here about how far should Curtis be drawing out the cool opportunities. And the fact that I'm picking up on cool opportunities means maybe he's done a very good job. But I wonder again if someone might read this and kind of their players are going around, and because stuff is so compact and compressed, which is in many ways very impressive, and I think is mostly a success, you could miss out on opportunities because you just never think of the players knowing about it, the information, even though they legitimately could. And players are going to do stuff and come up with cool ideas based on information, not based on no information. Yeah, there are many. The Virulia and their many servants. Aguldan is the prepared, post-preparation, processed mushrooms. You can see here, because it's a place where words and allegiances are more deadly than swords and spells, you need to reread the section on factions as well as the notes in the Virulia in this book and in Down Night Haunted Halls. As I say, there is no single collation of that information, and that is a bit frustrating. And yeah, he's making a point of the rules, the social rules about being allowed to move about unhindered by being patronised, basically, or by having a customs chit. You have a city encounter chart with there's a lower chance of encounters, but there's a city encounter chart. And yeah, you got some jokes. I don't like you either. There is more of a sense of relaxation and fun here. You have the leaders of the three main Virulia castes in the city. The Edgeferin are scouts, skirmishers, and archers. The Gula Omonk are gladiators, are they? Only the greatest fighters, yeah, you earn entry by deeds, not birth, and the Iltunovu Ulgra are wizards. So this is lower Tanna Leave. And yeah, plenty of that. There's often things like this, by the way. The watery tunnel leads deeper into the underworld, and the labyrinth lord is encouraged to create further areas beyond should the PCs decide to get their feet wet. Yeah, Curtis constantly adds on exits. Basically, every level has a few. Beyond this is another dungeon. And because it's not like he's neglecting us he's not published a 30-page module with like 3 pages of adventure, 7 pages of monsters, 12 pages of NPCs or something, and then said, but you could design this dungeon at home. There's no sense of that here. That's something that to tell another story of TSR completely like garbling Ed Greenwood's good early work is Haunted Halls of Evening Star. It is his map. It is his key, but it's only like half the key because they said you can only present a level and you can't put all the stuff from the key in it because we've decided to cut your book in half. So you instead have him saying, yeah, here's like a bit like with Undermountain, the same thing happens there. Here's 50 rooms, add in the rest if you want using counters, and here's some stuff you could go and access, and here's a brief mention of what's up here, and you think this is a frustrating use of of an adventure. Here, there's no sense of that. There's so much content that if your players get to the bottom right hand corner of level 7 in Talatai Leave and want to go swimming, then you can be like, oh man, great, I will need to generate some stuff. If that happens out of nowhere, you can just say, great, would pick up there next session. Or you can improvise. But it's not going to feel like you've been shortchanged by it. Level 8 is, you've got the bottom here, the fungal garden. He does make a gag about how every Megadungeon has to have a fungal level. The Court of the Three-Eyed King, Sanctum of the Plated Mage. Here, though the Plated Mage, I actually think, my sense is that though there's theoretical negotiation, that's exceptionally likely to be antagonistic. Here, you've got a lot of factions. You've got the Cave of the Mutox, you've got the Sanctum of the Plated Mage, and you've got the Court of the Three-Eyed King. The Three-Eyed King could be a future world big bad who invades the surface. He's a Triclops, a three-eyed giant. And yeah, therefore you've got these three factions who, all of which are sentient and want to negotiate about certain things. It depends what they want to negotiate. The Triclops and the Plated Mage are both bad. The Mutox leader, I think is actually okay. But there's the point. There's enough stuff you can do here that you could definitely, either get your Red Nails, your Jimbo Fistful of Dollars action going, and certainly there's a few examples of that throughout. I think it's further down, but you'll get stuff where you say an NPC will join you for this period of time or for this. There's and as I said, you've already got the Morlocks will revolt on a 1 in 12 chance modified by charisma. There is enough. Curtis always has in mind how can you get these people to do something with you, and the fact that here you have these three factions opens that up more. You can see there's some interesting things here in terms of the access. That this corner, the Astronaut's Tomb, is quite hard to access. I'm not sure if I picked up entirely how this is his tribute to Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Explicitly so, clearly so, openly so, in that he says, refer to Mutant Future for a bunch of the rules, which is the Gamma World adaptation, and it's a colony ship that's crashed on this fantasy world, colony ship from Earth, which is a reference to Metamorphosis Alpha, which is the predecessor to Gamma World and the direct inspiration for Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. So the Astronaut's Tomb has a very fun theme, albeit it's very much remixed. It's simplified, and it's remixed. This is actually one of the simpler sections you can see. One loop there, and then an outer loop that cuts in. Other than that, it's pretty linear. But yeah, its access points are fairly limited into the rest of the place. But the rest of it all just heads on to eventually the Magicek Sulcus, the bottom of that. And we'll look at the Astronaut's Tomb. I think that's an interesting one to look at. The Ariadne, basically all but there's one survivor of the Ariadne below who's in a lower level and is evil. She was a prisoner who she'd snuck aboard to escape prison and then was captured by the crew and frozen. The Astronaut's Tomb is a death trap, and in all likelihood PCs will die exploring it. No attempt has been made to make this a fair section of the dungeon. There is tediousness in exploring the tomb due to its weird doors, but this is intentional. And basically this is partly meant to make the players unsure about what's happening next. You can debate whether or not it's okay for it to be tedious. I don't think he really means it's tedious in the sense of boring. But I think it's interesting. It's not just his expedition to the Barrier Peaks and Metamorphosis Alpha reference, but it's also a Tomb of Horrors environment. It's a fairly set environment with. There are a few moving bits. S1 Tomb of Horrors doesn't really have moving bits. It doesn't have stuff that tracks from room to room. This does, and it's important to learn how to deal with the robots and stuff who do that. But it still has that sense. It's a funhouse dungeon at some level. There's lots of just weird bits that are quite lethal. There's loads of radiation that can kill you really easily. Um, you can mess around with consoles, but you can't understand them because you don't know the code, and so just random stuff happens. You get plenty of items like that in Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, of course. Here, there's no way to know if it's good or bad. Um, I mean, how many of these? So there's 2 of the 10 that nothing happens. 10 leads to a defense bot wandering around. 9 is kind of a bit of a mixture because it could go 50-50 good or bad. 8 just turns off the lights. 7 turns off defences. 6 produces robots, which is basically bad and dangerous. 5 doesn't do anything particularly important, nor does 4, but they both freak you out. And 3 helps you. So it's sort of a bit of each. There's probably a third. I guess 4 out of 10 don't do anything. Maybe 3 out of 10 are bad, and a couple are good. Um, it's that's what I mean. It's a good example of the press button, see thing happen, drink potion, see thing happen. There is also the Planet Wrecker, which is your Broodmother Sky Fortress here. It's a terraformer, which if you somehow get out and activate, will just start terraforming the world and causing extreme weather events. It's kind of dumb, but I like it. Like it's dumb in the sense that it's something where Curse says, "Look, they're unlikely to get it out. It's just a weird thing. Get rid of it if you want." I think the ambition of a game, of a campaign, is something where player actions matter, obviously. And I think the idea and the Megadungeon experience should include in fact, really any dungeon you hope has a bit of this. But I'm thinking particularly in the Megadungeon, particularly the bit where your characters are getting on in power. There should be things that are just massive events that are massive finds, big new magic items, new monsters, new evils. My players managing to release the Nightmare Librarian via being attacked simultaneously by the cartilaginous giant Sendam, the Lord of Madness. There's some context to this, and the crows and a bunch of zombies in Deep Carbon Observatory using negotiating with the Efreet in their iron bottle so that he doesn't completely screw them by wishing if we want to go and everyone who's on the magic carpet below as well to go back to Carrowmore, and it turns out the Nightmare Librarian is there, and you think, they've released this on the world. This is amazing. This is exactly what you want. And here, that the fact that it's so big, well, the players will know it's like a gigantic. It's described as a massive 35-foot long, 20-foot wide, 15-foot high APC with numerous sensors, pipes, blah blah blah. 12 armored tires, AC -1, 500 hit points, immune to fire, cold, lightning, weapons less than +3, 1/4 damage from all other attacks. There's radiation suits and keycards, nanite swarms, robots. There is actually some cool. This is something where there's the cool backstory, which you can find out from the kind of the sentient pool thing. Doesn't have much impact on the thing itself, on the area itself, other than I guess it makes you think. If you know, then you get some sense of okay, so these are the kinds of behaviours that the robots might have. But it doesn't give you much. It won't give you much else because the key cards are randomized. Because of the cool background being the Kion and the nanites work together to create a tomb fitting for the heroic crew of the Ariadne, which is nice. That's nice. But you never meet any crew of the Ariadne. You just meet monsters. And you're not going to having the information doesn't help you solve many puzzles. It's possible it could solve some puzzles if you, as the DM, were like, I think the pool would remember that the Kion knew this or something. So there's possibilities there, but it's just again it's very limited. I think it's an example of the backstory isn't bad and it doesn't outstay its welcome, but in this case it's not perfectly used. Lots of different types of bots, lots of different weapons, space zombies who are the undead mortal remains of some crew reanimated by the chaotic forces. There we go. Let's see. How fast the Plated Mage? Yep, here we go. Sanctum of the Plated Mage. Here, it's probably fair to think of this as the sub boss in a sense. It's not the most dangerous thing on levels 9 and 10. Obviously, it's level 8. But in terms of someone you've come across the evidence of many times, you might have heard legends of and rumours of this strange hybrid of Magitech, Arcanitech, and Mortal. the plated mage. And yeah, here um, he has, this is his magic. He obviously has lots of magic and lots of wands, wands of cold, wands of device negation, wand of fireball, wand of lightning bolts. Here, yeah, this just to look back on a question about the design of the combat here and basic is these monsters are made to potentially be fought, and in some ways to be fought. You could say, yeah, but we allied with these people and we're happy with that. Yeah, yeah, great. But Curtis has put some kind of big monster like in 2 out of 3 levels, basically. 2 out of 3 areas. Sorry, and the plated mage is one of the biggest, and the plated mage is bad, and he's doing bad things, and he has good stuff to steal and loot, and you're gonna have a lot of players who are gonna want to fight him, and yeah, at this point, I think along with Nick's thesis, this amount of kind of like magic gear and tricks and traps in the battlefield. Uh, Curtis is great at tactics too, so there'll always be like he calls helper. This happens. Um, this is, and there's sometimes, not often. Curtis does this less, but there's sometimes an environmental aspect too, like the room has this condition on it. He does that less. There are rarely big situational complexities for those kinds of potential boss fights. But yeah, there's enough here to make it quite challenging for a party, and at this point, presumably you are 7th to 9th level, let's say. Um, and death spell, disintegrate, uh, conjure elemental. Uh, there's a dispel magic. There's a haste on himself. There's a mirror image. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to screw up the player's plans. He is also because his head and his body have different ACs, but also different hit dice. And yeah, so 80 for the body, hit points, 40 for the head. His fists, I'd say the fact that his punching 2d10. I did think about this with a few examples of damage. Actually, this is one of the things that this was actually what directly sparked, not this example, but this issue. Not even think about the spells. Just think about what happens when an 8 or 9 HD creature, on level 7 or 8 or something, successfully hits in close combat. And I think there was one which was like 4d8, and I was thinking, or maybe it's 8d8. I think it's 4d8. I think it's 4d8, and I thought, so that will on average just kill anyone with 16 HP or less. And I was thinking, because this was, I think it's on this level somewhere. I was thinking, in that case, you've certainly got wizards who will just die, and yeah, don't get caught by the monster. There's a skill thing there, but you really got to hope that you don't. It's something where the hyper swingy elements of the system, and the lack of granularity are going to leave the players more vulnerable to that kind of result, aren't they? Especially if this guy's hasted. Yeah, but yeah, it's also the other observation is it's very much at the end of what this can do, in that these are still basically, here's some damage, here's a dispel, here's your device is negated, here's here's a monster to come fight you, an elemental. Nothing is bending the shape of the game in a way that high level AD&D does. And high level really starts from 9th level, so you get some shared spells, 5th level spells. In this, I agree. There'll be a bit of that, but I'm thinking it just gets increasingly so. Not when you're at 9th level, it begins to sort of ramp up, but when you're at 13th level, something in AD&D, and yeah, you have level 7 spells or something. So you've maxed out your cleric spells, and you're getting really up there for magic user spells. It's fair to say at that point, I don't think BX could cope with that. I think the lack of granularity makes this about as complex a battle as you can get. And it is made to be battled with all the rules. Here's a cool picture. Rare bit of art, but pretty cool picture. That's a clank hammer with some dwergs. Obviously. I like that, though. I think it's very cool. Experimental apes, greater golems, machine drones, major engineers, rules about being able to graft Arcanatech onto you. That's cool. That's useful. Yeah, this is not a play note. This is a just an observation about the reading and memorization of stuff. Is that when you're thinking, it depends. I would say you probably do want to read this back to front if you're going to run this section up. If you're further up, just read the relevant sections if you own both. If you once you're here, you're going to want to start thinking, especially because there are increasingly lots of connections. You're going to want to have a couple of levels that you know, and really because of the next thesis and some of the rules ending up to do with the next thesis you're going to want to read at least that section. So you're going to read the book basically, but probably to avoid feeling completely bored out of your mind by the formatting. It's interesting, by the way. That's what the reason it works better than some cliche, hyper bullet pointed, evocative text examples nowadays is because it's willing to be dry. The downside is if you're like, so I really need to get this all in my head. This entire level has to be in my head before I run anything. I very much say read the one section, the one quarter or one section, sextet or something like that. Yeah, the one part of it that you need to read and have a sense. There is this, the machine. So you got two things: the machine and the plated mage's sanctum, which you have. He's got a mage engineer, and he can call people to come and help. And the treasure here. So this is another good example. Actually, I think this is not the worst example at all. A secret entrapped. This is again the brutality of how he does this stuff. Yes, people can have potentially a wand of treasure detection that can help them here, but you fought the plated mage, and then you have to find the secret door. It is trapped, doing 8d8 damage to all within a 20-foot radius. Average 32 damage. At this point, you are regularly killing your clerics as well, remember, who have similar kinds of HD. They'll be at 8d8 at level 8. So, albeit they might, because they've got con bonuses, they'll average. They may have con bonuses. They will average slightly higher. Yeah, but you get it. And then there's 30,000 gold, and then the jewelry there is about 5,000, 6,000, and then there is 4 good items: Ring of Invisibility, a sword +1, Eyes of the Eagle, Scroll of Ward against lycanthropes. So, those are good items. The lycanthropes is going to be relevant for, and this is one thing, he does see treasure sometimes that's relevant, but there are lycanthropes on the next. Here, they're actually here. There's a few lycanthropes and not lycanthropes, vampires here. But there are lycanthropes down below in level 9. Yeah, but a sword +1. Eyes of the Eagle, pretty good. Ring of Invisibility, good. The treasure, though, 35,000 gold. You've beaten the plated mage, albeit you've earned some XP off that, I grant. Albeit, he doesn't actually give the XP rating. It's going to be I guess you're counting this. 12 HD plus. So yeah, you're going to get some healthy XP, but remember 12 HD is only 2,800 XP. So you might be talking this battle ends up with you getting a bit over 40,000 XP out of the combat and the treasure. And having lost people, but again, if you're running henchmen and hirelings, you probably should be if you can. You're not leveling up off this area. You're probably clearing most of a dungeon and not gaining a level, and most of a not small dungeon, a medium-sized dungeon, like a dungeon level, because each of these is not tiny. They are of moderate size. These levels. Or these sub areas, sorry, like this. This, to be fair, is on the smaller and simpler side. It's smaller, similar size slots than lots of 20 to 25 rooms, but this is a bit simpler and more open. But yeah, there's a real sense you could come out of this having done a couple of big things, had a couple of big fights, and got a couple of decent hauls, having taken casualties, and not been very close to advancing. And that's okay. You can clear other stuff on the same level to get up there. that's probably part of Curtis's logic. Is he's like, well, look, I don't want people to be 15th level going down to the ninth level, but it you're going to end up, I think, if you're running, let's say you're getting 8 to 15 rooms done per session, is yeah, you're going to get roughly the right kind of leveling rate there, uh, but that's at a very high speedy rate of play. And remember, for lots of people sessions, we're talking about a 4 hour session there, where you might get 15 done. If you're getting like, let's say, I mean, yes, you could get 15 done in 2 hours, but let's say you're getting less done. In fact, you're going to take a lot of sessions, a lot of weeks, to get up there and have fought not like, oh well, in this dungeon there is one boss, there's one Lareth the Beautiful, and there's one kind of really nasty sub area, and don't go in the Ghoul Warrens. You're going to have fought six or three or whatever, three or four depending, and you're not going to fight everyone because some people you want to be friends with. The Virulia, on the level above, remember Tanatil, even the casino, you should largely be trying to avoid combat in those areas. That is an entire third of level 7, which really isn't there for fighting. You want to keep those as an important mid-dungeon area as you go down into much more dangerous areas. Yeah, you've got the Triclops' lair, and here's level 9. Things begin to get a bit weirder. I think this is it's the last level on this plane of existence. It doesn't have the Magisex Sulcus. The odd old halls, the South and North Hellrill, and the Temple of the Unraveler. You start to get increase. You get more and more weird monsters, unraveled creatures who have been corrupted further by the Nycthesis. You get a Nacthotis Lesser, the Terror of Stitches. This is a Nycthesis is a type of Nacthotis. Nacthotis is a genera like devil or demon, explicitly compared to devil and demon. And so a lesser Nacthotis is the Terror of Stitches. These are usually horrendous, like childhood nightmare collations of things. Think Sid's monsters, Sid's toys in Toy Story or something like that. Yeah. So here, outside the temple, this is lots of just nasty monsters, and yeah, in the temple of the Unraveler, there is, yeah, is it this one? There is one really nice thing here. This is a good touch. The idea that, especially because I think there is a risk with Stonehell, I think it actually sometimes does fall into this of being um, very grim and antagonistic for long periods of time, even when you kind of are in a social situation. And most players like some variety there, and that's not something that Curtis often gives. The casino and I think the Fire Beetle Bar possibly are examples where that's less so. But here, there is just a thing where if you give it stuff, it will have good effects on you. That's nice, isn't it? A Cult of the Unraveler, Kaboom Kobolds. They were once a normal custodian team, but they are now all about to blow up. So that's weird. Flying bearskin carpet. This is a fun one, isn't it? It's the bear head can bite things. It can do a flyby. That's one of the kind of I think that's the kind of stuff you want to make sure you have a bit of. This is my thing about the sword +1 and the plated mage's lair, or his kind of sanctum, is at that play. It's that the sense that you've succeeded is partly represented by having cool stuff, not just stuff. It also is that the cooler the stuff, the more stuff it does. That's what you feel anyway. Rules about unraveled animals and whatever else. Curtis says you should generate your unraveled powers pre-game, and you should have some generic examples of unraveled powers. And this is sound advice in general. When you've got a complex nesting set of possibilities, it's good to prep. But it still feels a bit like you're saying there's going to be these monsters, just tell me what powers they have. The compression adds work for you in this case. It gives rules about how being unraveled affects different monsters and so on. the Hellrill. So this is the evil survivor of the Ariadne, and you can get her out and hang out. I wouldn't if I were you, but she can help you. I think it is a thing where she's either 8th level fighter or a pure 8th level pure human, so mutant future. She is familiar with all the artifacts located in the astronaut's tomb, including the planet wrecker. So bit of a risk there, but she could help you with stuff. It's a good choice. I think that's a nice touch. And here is this where Fate lives. I think you know who lives in that. There are actually there are a lot of Carstar's Fate, who is the vampire of Stonehell. There are some of the undead here, and there's also this weird beekeeper guy, an ancient stone giant who just wants to be left alone and has loads of giant killer bees. So he's not evil, but he is going to be a target for your players because he doesn't really want to hang out with them. He has some treasure, not amazing treasure. I mean, again, come on, like less than 10,000 gold here. But there is royal jelly, which counts as potions of longevity. And there's a in one area of the giant killer bees there is a warrior wisdom, actually, albeit again very much by the book treasure, sword +1, cloak protection +1, ward against elementals, treasure map leading to 24,000 gold, and a horn of blasting. That's a moderate hoard for a random fight if you survive the killer bees. That's actually more generous than Curtis normally is, but yeah, there's stuff to steal. But again, it's do the phase tigers help the? No, that they don't help anyone in this case. They have some okay treasure as well, but again, the XP coming out of it is less than 10,000. So you're and at this point you're presumably got a bunch of 9th level characters. You probably have some 10th level characters. This is and there's 5 of you plus a few henchmen. This is becoming increasingly less valuable. You've got to do a lot of this too, and that is fine. I don't want to sound like a hypocrite when I've said, oh, you don't want to like just concentrate it in the last room. Spreading it out is good, but it's about the danger quotient, and 17 killer bees is. Let's put it this way: let's say in each of these are very deadly dungeons. The Astronaut's Tomb might be a funhouse dungeon that is super deadly, but everything is deadly. If there are in a single section, a single quarter or sixth, there are 6 or 7 really tough encounters if you end up in combat. You don't have to, they might be negotiable or avoidable. And let's say you want to fight 3 of them. And let's say you have plans for all 3 of those and you prep and you know what you're doing. What happens if one plan goes slightly wrong? Well, you're going to lose several characters. And you're then going to be like, man, well, we fought that really tough set of people. What do we get? And you're like, oh, 7,000 XP for like this 8 survivors. And we've busted a load of our resources, and we've got to track back to a base. We've got to go back up to the casino, to Tanna Tyleave or whatever, to go and talk to our patrons. It's that you're going to end up with some frustrating delves. I would, and this is a general recommendation, isn't it, for Stonehill people? If you know anything about it, you know this. I would certainly consider upping the treasure. There's 2 in this area. There are 2 vampires. There's a fun thing where if you get the paperwork he has as this scion of the Fate family in back and wherever he comes from, the Ravenloft of this area, pretty clear. Tishkami, the grim mountainous land far to the east of Stonehill, is Transylvania. You could go and pretend to be related to that family for good and for bad, and that's a fun idea. Yeah, these are not massive or fascinating areas in themselves, but they just have some decent stuff to do. Super blocked doors, and yeah, there is a false tomb. Carstar's also just about gives you a another reference to S1 with a false tomb with enough treasure to make you go away. There's salamanders. There's the flame key with a lava worm. And here's level 10, the master map of level 10, which is the Fraying Tapestry West and East, the Atramental Crew Ore, and the Nord Heart. Extends into other dimensions. And the big thing here is that there's loads of weird stuff that's been dragged in from other dimensions. There's loads of other There's also portals to other places. Level 10 is the most fun Stonehill gets. I'm not sure if it's the best level necessarily in every respect. What I mean is some of those, the Magitek Sulcus levels, I think have a lot of space and stuff to do. I think is a big thing. Um, like as in you can work with these people in this situation. There's this set of things to do. You could Tanatai Leave is something which, though the map itself is very small, because it is meant to be a small settlement of the Virulia, you really shouldn't. You can and should be, as a DM, working out how to make that more significant and bigger, and make the players engage and care about it more, and get into the politics of it, and do their D3 or Menzo Baranza and stuff. So yeah, I like that's that. Whereas this, the big thing here, I mean, you are kind of told not to panic overly about the exact mapping. Everything's a bit crazy, etc. But I think there is just a degree here where there's a lot more set pieces, a lot more weird things. Some of them do connect to other things, but it's just helpful to see them as here's just some weird stuff. And for good or bad, that is less interesting. I think, as in some people might think that's interesting, is what I mean. I think that though it's at least lots of memorable things, it's it's akin to what is a bit of a criticism, but it mostly gets away with Sword Thrust RA 710, 719, whatever it was, from Roll Aids, which I really enjoyed, and I've run, and that it has an internal reason for why it's kind of wacky, and it mostly gets away with that, and there are a bunch of connections, but certainly just occasionally the disconnectedness of areas means you're like, oh, players can kind of dip in and out, and in that case, this is more antagonistic, but it's just a thing that strikes me that is that I guess Beyond the Crystal Cave has tiny touches of that too. The idea of, and in that case, partly because of its special design parameters, but the idea that there is just a little bit of like dissonance and disconnection. Yeah, the walls and ceiling could warm flesh striped with veins pulsing to the beat of an unseen heart, or they could be cold steel and flickering fluorescent lights, or solidified bodily fluid stinking of decay and sickness. I do wonder, this is because he's got 11 results and he doesn't want to write a 12th. Just make it up yourself. Again, is that, I don't think that's ideal. There's more Nacthotis, the crawling cancer, who makes Tumorous dead. The Fraying Tapestry out west. This is the key. The true shrine of the Nyx Thesis, not the fake one with the Unraveler, which people think he's probably a good guy, but he's not. The Silent Ship, there is a schooner in here with treasure. There's, he does say, unless you decide otherwise, it's been abandoned or whatever. And I think that. There's an interesting thing there that Curtis recognises here's an opportunity to put something in. But again, that's an entire environment. I mean, you think about, I know that is a complex one, but in The Fortunate Son in Night of the Shark by Bruce Cordell, there could be a bunch of stuff on here, and it's eventually getting summed up as 3,000 gold and 10 arrows plus one, or whatever. Here, this takes. Yeah, this is just a bad place. No, this is one of the portals out. There is another quite interesting portal, which I'll touch on when we get there. Frost salamanders, because you can be infected with some like thing which burns you from the inside out on the level above. Frost salamanders are good to find. The fact they've been dragged in, I think there's a fun thing here, of course. Though there's some discussion about them pursuing prey. Again, you're getting the tactics first, rather than saying they are like this or this is how they interact. This is what I mean. I said earlier about there's no general principle about how often or when to roll for reactions. And maybe that's because the default is every time. But yeah, you kind of want to come and negotiate with them, don't you? So yeah, having connections like that might be helpful. As in Curtis pointing it out. There are human heads from Easter Island, but maybe one of them is. I assume when it says a certain famous dungeon level, I assume that is a grinning devil head rather than a Moai head. This makes no sense. Yeah, there's just mastodons hanging out and they can't get out. So there's some fun set pieces there, or fun things. Lord Mousebane, he's like an intelligent super cat who'll join you if you'll get him and his like army of cats out of Stonehell. I think this is great. This is fun. Stonehill has earned whimsy by this point. Stonehill has been so unremittingly grim. Finally, having the Marquis de Carabas or whatever turn up and join you, and yeah, be your ally and friend. He is an average house cat, but has int 13 and can talk any tongue. Um, and yeah, he can talk to feline creatures. And then there's an army of cats: giant scorpions, undead smilodons, land narwhals, and yeah. Here's the map of the eastern part of the fraying. You have Tyrannosaurus. You got a nice little. This is a Roanoke reference, isn't it? There. You've got some Chimera. They suck, don't they? You've got a train. Pachogue, Bellport, Mastic, Shirley, and Spayoink. I'm trying to think. Is that a Stephen King reference? It wouldn't be the only one. Someone can tell me in the comments. Um, there's Party of Laughing Women. There's loads of mist that turns into rock grub. That is a particularly nasty one. I think if you're like a 10th or 11th level BX character, you can just put up with mist turning into rock grubs. A coughing clock. And scrap. So scrap heap, sword +3, frostbrand, and shield +2. Finding some. It takes a bunch of effort. There's bronze golems hiding in there. The risk reward still feels a bit kind of lopsided, but at last you're getting some kind of actual top tier stuff. There's maybe a question about why you're only getting it at this point. There's a tiny bit of mudcore about Stonehill, isn't there? A tiny bit of everything you get and earn must have come through utter misery, and sometimes really be only moderately powerful for the area you've got it on. He's very rarely open to the big swing of maybe the characters just get some crazy power. I like that kind of design philosophy, and I've talked about books that do that, but Curtis is less like that. The Achmental Cruor is the world's lifeblood, but being corrupted by the Nycthesis in this one area. And the Arcane Anvil and the Forge of Power, relics left over from the time before chaos infested the bowels of Stonehell. So you can make cool stuff. Sinuous Statue you can give stuff to, and you gain power from, but can lose its temper and attack you. Crystal Skulls of Wamundu are pretty obviously his in-house beholder. I liked this area. Former Potionarium, the incomplete work. There's just lots of. At this point, it's that because the upside of when I say, it's all just a bunch of set pieces, is there's just so much more flavour here than in some of those upper levels where you're like, and particularly true in Down Night Haunted Halls, less true in this section in this book. But where you're like, oh, okay, that's not very interesting. That's like several rooms I've been into that aren't nothing memorable about them. You could be resurrected in the crew, or you could be corrupted. There's bone golems hiding. Again, they're just like those bronze golems. The treasure is not necessarily massively exciting, if we're honest. So you're a 10th level character getting a few thousand. Well, your party's getting a few thousand XP out of something. This is a cool one. There's red dragons who are likely to destroy trespassers, but if quickly parleyed with and offered a means to escape, they'll spare intruders. So basically, they could become your allies briefly, but they'll then attack you. That's fun. By the way, it's okay they screw you. You don't. But this is a rare example of Curtis giving instructions about reactions and negotiation, and I wish he had more, because here it's okay that there's the risk that it's going to go wrong, but you wish that there was more clear elsewhere about what kinds of reactions there are. So yes, and then finally the Nord Heart. In one area there's the author. It's Michael Curtis wrapped in pages of Stonehill that don't resemble the current place you're in, but might give you some insight into something. It allows you to can study. You get basically a page of Stonehill to read. This is definitely a Stephen King reference, or rather, I don't mean it actually definitely is. What I mean is, it is a Stephen King reference, whether or not Michael Curtis likes it. It just makes me think of Stephen King. There's an orphanage, which is, at this point, this I'm not even sure I like. It's kind of clever, isn't it? But the idea that basically a bunch of Children start following around and gripping your legs, but they're not actually children, to be clear. They're just manifestations of chaos, and they're just a nightmare because they're desperate for help. They're begging for help, but they just distract you, get in the way in combat, and attract monsters. What do you do? Um, yeah, I think that's clever, but I'm not sure I love it. Fenniscal the Abide is um, the High Priest of the Nyxthesis. There's then like a chupacabra thing. Damned boys, undead soldiers drawn from the charnel fields of the Great War. Mornak Thotis, the horrible delights and the mangled innocence. And yeah, at this point, you again just have there's a scrape of the Somme, number one here. So there's some damned boys um, in a kind of bit of remnant battlefield of the Somme. So that's quite kind of grim and foreboding, isn't it? And the monsters. What do the damned boys do again? Oh, they can gas you with Cloud Kill. 11 HD, gas you with Cloud Kill. 2 attacks per round at 1d12 each. Again, I mean, something where a combination of some of these things really could take out, frontline fighters as well. And they summon zombies. Um, the zombies are now zombies are not exactly a massive problem. I think there is. I think we skipped over it. An example above where like someone has 40 skeletons and 20 zombies, and the plan is essentially it might be a Carstar's Fate actually, or something like that. But essentially, the trick is not that it's going to actually threaten ninth level PCs one to one, but just enough attacks will get through. And I've certainly, I would say, you do find that it's a very acceptable Gygaxian tactic. Lost Temple of Tharisden. The idea that you're quite powerful, but a bunch of 3 HD monsters can still hurt you unless you have exceptionally good kind of damage reduction magic items or whatever. They're going to fire, and 2 of them are going to hit, and they're going to do 8 damage, and that's going to happen every round, and you're going to get worn down, and even though you eventually get through them, you're going to be vulnerable for the next thing. And so that this again, it is hard, especially because the damned boys are not there to hang out. They're not going to negotiate. And do we have them? Where's the Nordhart? Yeah, here, one way in, one way out. You're going through them. There is an assumption that this is a combat heavy module, as I've already said. You're going through them. Shrine to the Nyxthesis, Fenniscal's Chamber. This is one of the major treasure troves of the whole place, and it's locked and trapped. Drain 2 life levels, brutal. It's funny, isn't it? Are you more or less annoyed by that than by save or die? But yeah, there's 15,000 in gold and a couple of thousand in gems and a spellbook. The spellbook is the most valuable thing there. At this point, that GP feels very nominal. The author, the Cathedral of Teeth, Into Autumn Mists. This is an interesting one. Note 1. Is note 1 up here? Yeah, Shiverwen. This is something which I googled it. I have never really, I never heard of it. Michael Curtis has a blog, which he only blogged on in 2013. There are a few mentions of people playing it with Michael Curtis. Obviously, Curtis hasn't released or published anything for a long time. No, I think since about 2015. And which was a single small cut. Was that the last thing he did? Was that 2015? A single small cut? I may be corrected, but yes, Shiverwen was this kind of Magitech dying, kind of like fairy dying at Fairy Field, dying Earth place, where technology still kind of functions, or Dark Tower as well, still kind of functions in cities, but becomes increasingly less functional outside of cities, and it becomes an increasingly fantastic environment. And I do think that's great. A great idea. It's a shame there's not very much out there. But there's a whole thing where it's like you could just go and do a campaign somewhere else. You could go to Shiverwen. Um, and you could also just put somewhere else in. But I think that's amazing. I like those touches. I think particularly here you're at the payoff and you might as well put everything, throw everything at the wall. Gallery of the Hanged, GUI Rooms, Reversal of Time. With that, again, a fun one in terms of you get a potion of longevity but just lose a bunch of well, depending on how many years you lose that much XP times 1,000. Unraveled hill giants with aluminium shelves, um, cooking implements, odd unrecognizable devices of metal and plastic, Muzak. This odd area is a houseware section of a modern department store. Again, just one of many things transported in. The Sea of Dreams, you can eventually get to Perplexuram, the metropolis that only exists in the Sea of Dreams. So you can do some Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. That It's interesting. I get you. Maybe there's a design thing here because I know I put stuff like this in um, because you constantly have the ideas firing and you're constantly thinking you want to give options. Here, of course, it's a funny thing. You're in the very heart of this place, and on the lower level there are at least three major portals elsewhere. Two of which just seem to be to fun places that you might enjoy going to more than fighting the Nyx Thesis. You then get a detailed boss fight discussion. It has, sorry, a lot of things. Plate mail +3, stoner controlling earth elementals, shield +3, life drinker. Um, yeah, the gold. I mean, I'd say at this point you are talking about that's 90,000 gold there between the gold and the platinum. This is a lot more worth it, but this is the end, and that money is just going to. At this point, the money is you're not going to adventure very much. This is just, as he says, in fact, just going to go on domain. It is 100 hit points, 20 hit dice, um, and 5 manual attacks plus it has some other options. It can fight on two planes, the ethereal and the prime. It can drain emotions when it attacks with that appendage with its proboscis, and siphon charisma from people. And it can also do a chaos blast, which is a dragon's breath attack equivalent, which is save versus breath attacks to halve damage equal to the Nycthesis' current hit points. And yeah, it will essentially attempt to flee to, once it's reduced to 50%, it's bloodied, it will flee to the other realm from which it's being attacked. So you have to attack it on both, and you have to give it a few options out. Carstar's Fate, there's actually similar instructions for. It really is that this is the end game is combat. It has a couple of types of webs, partly which are there to kind of to knock them because of all the web bridges in this environment. This is a rare case of big environmental importance. But yeah, to knock off people off the web bridges. Stuff about defeating the Nyx Thesis, and then you have the appendices, and I'll just flick to the front to glance over them there. So Chaos Events is a D100 list of all kinds of crazy stuff happening. I'll maybe flick in a second, we'll read a couple. The Nacthoti are summarising all of the Nacthoti that have already appeared, plus 2 extra or 3 extra. So, giving a bunch. It's your own little fiend folio. Roster of Heroes is all the names of characters who have gone through Stonehell from both Curtis and from all the people who have reported about it to him. Vidium is the magical mineral you can get in Stonehell. And then there is Errata, and then an afterword where he talks about the journey of making Stonehell. Chaos Events. It begins to rain in the party's location. There's a tiny thunderstorm. Slugs and snails fill the PC's mouth, force him to make a con check or become nauseated for 1, 2, 3 minutes, etc. A mass of glowworms, fireflies, glowwing moths, or whatever appear. They spell out one of the PC's names in bioluminescence and then depart as quickly as they appeared. Not every non-magical iron or steel object in the party's possession abruptly rusts. You might spontaneously combust. That's fun. There's lots of fun things there. This is brimful of usable content. I think it's very good. I think there's just a degree to which the propensity for it to kind of large parts of it to feel the same, but that by same, sorry, I don't mean they feel the same. There's a lot of variety here. What I mean is they don't pop always. There's a higher hit rate, particularly when you get down to the last couple of levels, but there's still enough kind of very ordinary dungeon levels which are there, I guess, to keep up the tone. But the fact that there's just a bit of, let's call it, less mudcore and more dustcore. This kind of continual, here's another layer of Minotaurs. you're going to have to think heavily about how you adapt this or use this, and you as well as the other small problems announced before. And I think it's an interesting one that, yeah, it offers big payoffs. It offers the plated mage, it offers the portals to other worlds, it offers the Nycthesis, it offers the vampire, it offers the Triclops king. You've got in on the bottom three levels, you have four absolutely enormous villains. You also have an entire Drow city, and civilization to interact with, and access to the wider world. You can change the world in a few big ways with the terraforming device, or via destroying the next thesis, and Stonehell beginning to change and slightly improve in some ways. Um, but yeah, there's just a little caution. I feel just a little caution about kind of how far would I say this is what I'm going to run. Um, but I think this half certainly makes me more excited than just the first half, which was good. This is very good. This is a step up. It's brimful of cool ideas, sections you can rip for other things, dungeons you can run in other places. It's got the chaos list, the chaos event list, which is just very useful probably for anything like that. The Nacthotis, the appendices are valuable. Um, and there's a few very memorable characters and moments, and I think certainly your players will come away from it with that. The layout mostly works, even if the compression sometimes damages it, and the the general it's a triumph, isn't it? It's for all those caveats. It is a triumph, and is well worth studying when thinking about writing adventures as well as when you're thinking about running this adventure. Anyway, I'll leave that there. That's been a long time, and I will see you next time. Tell me your thoughts in the comments.